Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us and welcome to this session on Mastering Gateway 3 Compliance, where today we will be covering changes to recent building regulation, particularly the Building Safety Act, why information is an important part of this, and how to master and achieve Gateway 3 compliance and build out a building safety case. Firstly, I just wanted to introduce you to our speakers today. My name's Harry Seal. I will be moderating the session, as well as talking about some of the recent regulatory changes and why these have been put in place. I'm also joined today by Paulius Vainauskas, who is going to talk us through Gateway 3 digitisation and the best approach. Jeslyn Joy, who will demo our Zutec Golden Thread Gateway 3 dashboard and talk about why this is a system that can help you bring data into one place. And I'd also like to welcome to the session our special guest speaker, Dr. Krish Palmer from the Safety Case Partnership, who will deep dive into what a building safety case is and the requirements. Thanks for joining us today, Krish. Perfect. So look, before we get into the crux of the session, we'll be looking at why Gateway 3 has been introduced, what this means, and how you can digitize data and manage the requirements in the most pain-free way. Just a few housekeeping bits before we get started. Firstly, we're recording the session for on-demand purposes. If you have any questions as we go through, please just ask them during the session, either on the chat function or the Q&A message board. We'll either address them as we go or at the end, we'll take some questions for our panel. Also, just to make you aware that we will be running polls throughout the webinar. So if you could please just provide answers as best you see, as and where you can, that will be much appreciated. Fab. So just to cover off first and foremost, I just wanted to introduce ourselves, the Build Data Group. For those of you that don't know the Build Data Group, we are a collection of complementary companies that provide best-in-class software and solutions across the REBA stages of the building lifecycle, supporting our customers' digital transformation journeys. Together, our brands have a combined expertise working across the built environment of over 20 years, with solutions created for supporting areas such as building information management, quality management, digital handover, and building regulation compliance. Some of you may know Zutec, which is our SaaS platform and common data environment. And while this provides one platform as a single source of truth for information and data, we also provide point solutions in a modular way for quality management and digital handover, as well as regulatory compliance such as Part L and Golden Thread. CreateMaster, who some of you will also be familiar with, is one of the UK leaders in digital handover and structured data, with a professional and experienced team bringing together quality building manuals and documentation for contractors for handover to asset owners at project completion to ensure regulatory compliance. And last but not least, the third one there is Bond Bryan Digital. Bond Bryan Digital provides structured data and building information management and modeling solutions, providing consultancy and information requirements for our customers. As a group, we continue to develop and add more capabilities and value across our product portfolio so we can support the construction industry as it embraces evolving technology and regulation. In terms of our approach as a business, we very much like to build relationships and partnerships with our customers. They're the focal point to the decisions that we make related to delivering products, solutions, services, and experiences. We take that customer-first approach to everything that we do and always put our customers first. We also have a customer success team that sits at the heart of our business and is dedicated to making sure our key stakeholders get solutions that work for them. We've never wanted to spread ourselves too thinly, so we very much work with companies across the residential sector. So contractors, house builders, developers, build-to-rent organisations, housing associations, and asset owners, providing solutions for regulatory compliance and for driving efficiencies. You can see on the slide there some of the companies that we work with today, and these companies have very much been instrumental in helping us to develop solutions that work alongside your working practices and overcome their pain points. And one area that keeps coming up time and time again is compliance. In terms of the CreateMaster business itself, as the leaders in delivering structured data and digital handover solutions, we have delivered over 2,500 projects, processed over 3 million documents, and have more than 212 years of collective experience in this space, with a client services team of 40 and over 70% of our customer base being regular repeat customers. So now we're just going to kind of look at the why. So in the last year, we've seen a number of regulatory changes across the UK building sector, with the first provisions from the Building Safety Act 2022 coming into effect, as well as updates to Fire Safety Act 2023. Following the review by Dame Judith Hackett, the Building Safety Act, as an example, has been deemed critical post the Grenfell disaster to deliver a framework for building safety with a focus on ensuring that building owners and operators take responsibility for the safety of their buildings and that the regulatory system is effective in ensuring that buildings are safe. When Grenfell happened, one of the issues was the information on the building couldn't be found to make decisions that fateful night. As part of this new legislation, the government has paid particular attention to information and data and put an emphasis on digitisation to ensure data is correct and up to date across the building life cycle. This should ensure that the right data and information is digitally available for all buildings. And when we say digital, we don't just mean in electronic form, but digital so that it can be accessed easily by the right people and that the right data is easily found so that buildings can be maintained and operated in the safest way, ensuring critical information is always available, accessible, and up to date, so that duty holders can make informed decisions around safety and that tenants understand fire safety procedures. Still today, critical building information has largely been managed in silos, documented on paper, Excel, or PDFs that can be lost or damaged, and stored on disparate servers or devices across multiple locations. When stored like this, it does not provide an easy path to find the right information when decisions need to be made. Also, when data is not easy to access, can anyone ever be sure that data is actually up to scratch in terms of insight, availability, accessibility, and compliance? Additionally, not only does that information have to be accessible, but there is a legal requirement to share key building information with the regulator for higher risk residential buildings that comes from a building safety case. Every high risk residential requires a building safety case, which can contain thousands of documents and data points. All in all, this regulatory change has brought a lot of upheaval and uncertainty, but with the right guidelines and the right tech, the path to preparing for digitisation and accessibility for the right people will be easier and make the adjustment period faster. So, in terms of Gateway 3, occurring at the completion certificate stage of a build, Gateway 3 refers to the point at which a building safety case is submitted to the regulator for review and approval. As a stop-go point in the handover process, building control approval must be obtained from the Building Safety Regulator before registering and commencing occupation of a higher risk residential building. As a contractor and asset owner, you have a significant responsibility to ensure that safety throughout the Gateway 3 process, with your obligations being as follows. Preparing a comprehensive safety case. You're required to prepare a safety case that demonstrates that the building you're working on is safe and meets all the relevant safety standards. This should include information on the design and construction of the building, any fire safety measures, and details of any potential risks. And safety case submission. Once a safety case has been prepared, it must be submitted to the BSR for review. The regulator will ensure that the building meets all the relevant safety standards and that all potential risks have been identified and mitigated. Once a building safety case is approved by the BSR, a completion certificate is issued to the HRRB so that the HRRB can be registered with the regulator and key building information provided by the principal accountable person, both of these being requirements of the Building Safety Act 2022. A building cannot be occupied until all these steps are taken. As a contractor, this information must be digital and handed over to your client to help manage building safety risks, ensuring they have accurate, good quality, up-to-date information on the building. This is critical to ensure the safe operation and occupancy of a building. So while we have you all on the webinar, I'm going to move on to our first poll of the session, with the question being, are you ready for Gateway 3 and submitting a building safety case? The poll should appear on your screens shortly. If you could just click on the answer that best applies to your business. Perfect. Thank you for submitting your answers into the poll. Look, thank you. That was a brief introduction from myself. I'm now going to hand over to Krish Palmer of the Safety Case Partnership, who is going to look at what a building safety case is.
Thanks, Harry. Let's go back. So yeah, thank you very much. Safety Case Partnership was co-founded by two companies called Empiricist and Halo. And we specialize in the high hazards industry, providing these expertise now to the construction sector. SCP supports organizations to ensure they are fully compliant with the Building Safety Act. On top of this, we support the principal accountable person in preparation and ongoing management of the safety cases with the same regulator that we've been used to working with in other major hazard industries. On top of this, we have the technical and commercial knowledge needed for the construction industry in risk analysis, which is the underlining theme in these safety cases. So I'll move on to talk a little bit more about this. So I wanted to put this timeline in because the construction sector is not being picked on here. And we can see from the timeline that Grenfell was the last of a long line of major catastrophic events that led to multiple fatalities. The safety case regime for other sectors like marine, oil and gas and chemical sectors are in principle the same as what we now have for construction. And fundamentally, we are moving from a perspective approach to risk to a goal-based approach, which I will talk a little bit more about, in a little bit more detail. So fundamentally, the safety case regime for the Building Safety Act focuses on two major accident hazard categories. These are fire and structure. So this means that the principal accountable person needs to consider the building as a whole instead of individual risks. And it is not compliance driven, so it is driven by a concept called ALARP, which stands for as low as reasonably practicable. So this doesn't mean that there's a fixed line to indicate if you're compliant or not. It means that it depends on the individual building and its inherent risks. So the purpose of ALARP is to ensure that the risk remains acceptably low for the lifetime of the building. And the test is based on something called gross disproportionality. And what this means is that you'll have to demonstrate as an accountable person that you have brought the risk down to a low enough level, which is then, and it becomes disproportionately expensive to go any lower. And this is quite different from the regime we have been operating in, but it aligns perfectly with the other major hazard sectors that we have experience in. So moving on, let's talk about what a safety case is. It's basically a case or argument to demonstrate why a building is safe. And to achieve this, we need to answer 5 basic questions. The questions themselves are basic, but the answers are not always. So these are the 5 questions. So what can go wrong in your building? If it does go wrong, what can happen? And then what control measures have you got in place? So smoke detectors, fire alarms, sprinkler systems, etc. And then do these control systems actually work when they're required to? And finally, how do you know? So I'll go into a little bit more detail about the safety case itself. So the safety case comprises of several different elements, and we put this diagram or pyramid to try and explain this. So if we look at the foundation of all of this is evidence, is the substantiation of the information and the documentary evidence to help answer those 5 questions. So let's take a quick example of fire doors. You need to know the number of fire doors you have. How have they been installed? How have they been inspected? Have those inspections been successful? Have those installation and inspections been done by a competent person? How do you know that it's been done by a competent person? And how do you know their competency still remains valid? Now, that's just fire doors. So if you start multiplying this by the number of controls and safety systems in a building, you can start to see how a substantial amount of information comes together to form a safety case. And then we can think about the orange section there, which is the safety case itself. So this is a structured organization of all this information to essentially answer those 5 questions. Once you're able to put this information together, we can move on to the safety case report in green here. So the safety case, the report itself is a relatively short and a relatively non-technical summary of the safety case. This should be written in a way that is accessible to a non-technical expert. And then finally, we have the top pyramid in blue, the top triangle in blue, which is the resident summary. Now, this is an important and specific request of the Building Safety Act. So it's a very short summary possibly with diagrams and pictograms, to explain in very simple terms all of the major accidents that exist in a particular building, what control systems are in place, and the emergency response arrangements are in place if the worst should happen. So let's go into a little bit more detail. So if we look, this is our stage gateway approach for safety case partnership. So if we look at the first building block, it's all about building information. It's about the collection of this information, and inevitably there will be gaps. So one of the key actions will be required to fill these gaps. And once we have all the relevant information together, we can move on to stage 2, which is a highly structured process called HIRA, hazard identification and risk assessment. So for higher risk buildings, we're really talking about 2 major accidents here, fire and structural integrity. But within each of these, there are a number of sub-major accident hazards that we need to consider. So for fire, for instance, you'd have fire within a compartment, fire breaching compartments, or fire in common areas. So we have to undertake this hazard identification process and evaluate the risks associated with all of these hazards. Once we're able to perform this process and we can answer those questions about what are the hazards and how they can go on, we can move on to the next stage 3, which is a gap analysis against the building safety management system. So this normally is centered around the repair, inspection, and maintenance systems. But there's much more to this, and with the interest of time, I'll keep it short and just say a few more about things we need to consider. So these are, how do we manage competencies, the auditing and inspection process? How do we collect performance indicators so we know that the building in question is safe on an ongoing basis? So once we're able to perform this, and we move on to stage 4, which is all about collecting all this information to build out a resident engagement strategy and a mandatory occurrence strategy. So these 4 stages, these are 4 complex and involved stages, but these elements 1 to 4 actually represent the essential evidence and information you need for the safety case. Once we have all of this put together, we write the safety case report, which is a technical authoring process, and we need to ensure we get this in a state that can be submitted to the regulators. From this comes the resident summary. What's important here is, just like the other major hazard industries, the regulator does not expect perfection. They fully expect there to be gaps in your safety case, and those gaps should be fully reflected in a prioritized action list, which form part of the safety case itself. I'd like to make a key point here, and that's to remember that this is not a wish list we're submitting. This is a legal document. So these are firm commitments to the regulators that you will be held accountable for. So with this in mind, I'd just like to quickly summarize. Move on to the next slide, if I can. Right. So yeah, fundamentally, the key deliverables are a safety case report, a resident engagement report, and a mandatory occurrence reporting process. And I'm hoping that this brief overview, I've managed to demonstrate that all of these are fundamentally important to the quality, completeness, and availability of your safety information. Right, thank you very much. Thanks, Harry.
That's great. Thank you, Krish. We're going to move on to our second poll in a moment, which will appear shortly. Before we do, I just wanted to kind of go back to that first poll. I think kind of the overwhelming response from that, there was over sort of 50% of the audience that have answered have said that they are now in a position where they are starting to prepare. But also worth noting that only sort of 12% of respondents were in a place where they believe they are now ready. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Paulius Vainauskas in one moment to take you through a couple of slides on the best approach for Gateway 3 digitization. But before you do, if you would be able to just answer the second poll for us, which should be on your screen now. How do you hand over your building information at project completion today? And for this one, if you could just tick all of the answers that apply to your business, that would be great. Perfect. Okay. From the poll, it's looking as though USBs seems to be kind of the sort of the most consistent, followed by SharePoint, and at the bottom end, it appears to be sort of CDE with only about 7% referencing CDE. Thanks again. We've got a sort of third poll coming up towards the back end, but appreciate everybody in the call responding to these. Paulius, if I'll now hand over to yourself to run through the next set of slides.
Thanks, Harry. So given common data environments are the most popular way of managing digital records at the moment on construction projects, one of the questions that we have seen our clients ask is, well, why can't I use my common data environment to achieve this compliance and evidence the key building safety information that is required under Gateway 3? And I would like to take you through a couple of points to open up a discussion as to why that your CDE might not be well equipped to manage that process at the moment. So the premise is it's great to manage the project information. You are familiar with it, your supply chain is familiar, your clients are mostly familiar with common data environments, but it's not necessarily tailored to meet the changing legislative requirements and to help you build or set up for a comprehensive building safety case that Krish spoke about a moment ago. And one of the reasons as to why it's not enabling you to do so at the moment is you don't have a defined template as to what the digital records you need to provide at a particular gateway should be exactly, and linking those records to a standardized data set that could be applied to not just a single project, but say an asset portfolio for some of the bigger organizations. The workflows and forms that are built on CDEs, again, are not specifically aligned with the building safety case and maintaining the golden thread of information. And what that means is that there's a real struggle there to provide simple visibility and tracking of what you have at any given stage in terms of the digital records and what you haven't got, which then means there's a risk for the asset operator or owner in terms of, if I have a gap in my data, what risks am I facing and how am I going to manage these risks? So it's clear that a defined process and mechanism is needed, firstly, to collate this information into a platform or a solution that can be passed on to the client in a comprehensive, easy to navigate way, giving them that visibility. Here's what you have, here's what you haven't got, and here's how you can manage the risk based on that gap analysis. And also thinking about access post project completion, right? So if you are a contractor responsible for handing the building over, you can give client limited access to your common data environment, but once the project is finished or once the defects period is done, all that information needs to be owned by the responsible party, needs to be submitted to regulators on a regular basis, needs to be kept updated and live. And how would you enable the end client to do so if it is, from what we can see in the poll, a USB export of mostly files and folders and PDFs, right? All of the data might be there, but making sense of it, accessing it, passing it on to the relevant parties becomes somewhat of a challenge that we have set out to address as an organization. So this leads us on to the how can we achieve this compliance, and I'll talk a little bit about what we have done in this space to address these questions. So Harry already mentioned that we are a group of companies that specialize in complementary services. So Create Master has been dealing in digital handover documentation for over 20 years, right? 2,500 projects. I think we're sitting at about 4,200 buildings worth of data that we have delivered over those years. So we have a fairly good understanding of what you should have for your O&M manual, for your health and safety file, for your fire safety information and the associated documents. That is a starting point. Zutec as a software and a sister company enables us to use its tools to present that information in an easy to understand way, in visual dashboards, easy reporting tools that Jez is going to take you through in a moment, and you'll see exactly what that looks like. And then Bond Bryan Digital, who manage the BIM Kobe information management aspects of it, working together with us from CreateMaster, have helped us put together a master register of all of the digital records that we believe are necessary at Gateway 3, the point of handover, to hand over to the end client asset operator, right? So we have a digital template that is ready to use. And we have consulted a number of our key clients out there in the industry as to what should be included in that template as a starting point. Are you in agreement that these records need to be provided? Linking these records to Uniclass codes to establish a level of consistency and standardization across the board. So whether it's a single asset or 50 assets that you might have in your portfolio, you can make sense of that information and navigate that data set in a sensible way. And what that means essentially is that we have a go-to starting point to say, here is a digital template that we can deploy today to assist you on your high-risk residential project in collating, reviewing, and evidencing key building information to support the building safety case that you and the client will need to submit to the regulator, and give you visibility of what you have and haven't got at any given stage in the construction phase once that is live. So we focus on delivery. We focus on the end client and operator who will have to take ownership of that data set, keep it live, and give access to the relevant authorities to evidence that the documents are updated. There's a golden thread of information in the sense that any changes to the records are tracked, visible, and can be evidenced quite easily. And it's a single source of truth at the end of the project. It's not replacing your CDE. It's not replacing SharePoint per se. It's not replacing your quality assurance record systems. It's pulling information from all of those different places into a standalone solution that can then be passed on to the relevant people and enable you to run that building safely. And now over to you, Jess, to demonstrate the dashboard.
Perfect. Let me share my screen now. Share. I hope everyone can see my screen. Perfect. So thanks for that. What do you say, that leading into the demo, the outline. So where I want to start on our demo is to take you through what we are proposing, right, in terms of how we are trying to define and track this golden thread of information that's relevant to the building safety case. So where we start is with a template of sample deliverables, what you're seeing here on the screen, right? So this would be issued to our customers as we onboard them. And then when during that process, this list will be reviewed and curated to include additional information that might be required on a project by project basis, or it can, or there will be systems that is not relevant to a particular project. We can take them off. So what this is actually doing is trying to define what information is that you need at which gateway and which rebus stage. So we are setting kind of a template upfront to define what your deliverables are, so that you know at gateway 3, when the contractor is finishing it, as a contractor, you know that your deliverables are in line with the customer's expectation. And equally, the client or the principal accountable person who's taking ownership of this knows what he's expecting as a delivery coming from the contractor. And you can set that expectation up right when you go on the project. So that's the first piece of it. Now, we have seen scenarios where customers share with us their own deliverables list. So we have this deliverable list that we want to start with. The customers may say, look, we have our own list that we have sat down with our building safety case assessors and our information management consultants and have them defined. So we have a really flexible platform to incorporate such requirements into our standard model. So the list will consist of expected deliverables, planned data drops, and we can track that using our dashboard. So that's the first piece here. defining a list of deliverables, and making sure that what do we need at what stage. So that's the first piece. And then as I go into my overview, that list of deliverables then creates a list of records or placeholders per se, as we call, which will have a workflow that's associated with it. For example, what you're seeing here on the screen is based on that sample data that I've got, which I've checked a few boxes saying, yep, I need those information. So I know what percentage of it is not received yet, meaning I have an expectation to receive them, but I still don't have it yet. What have I received and what's been reviewed and validated? So we have a workflow that's sitting on top of it. So what are we doing here? We are actually looking at that information coming through, and there is a process of validating that information as it comes through, because we don't want that information to have no reviews done. So there is a mechanism that's involved in the backend. So there's two pieces to this. One is a managed delivery or a self-managed delivery. I think Paul will get to that in a bit as I move away from the demo. So as we move forward into this, it's an interactive dashboard. So you can actually see here at Gateway 3 what's actually needed, breakdown by rebus stages or by PM groups as outlined in the unit class references. So we can actually define it as whatever classification that you need for your data, because we need to make sure that it works for you, right? So unit class mapping is a really good way to define these deliverables. However, we also know that we have been in the sector for a long time. So we have seen customers having their own internal classification system that they would like to incorporate. We are open to discuss it on this subject and provide best approach for you that works for the customer. So let me just quickly tie this back to what we're doing and why we are doing this. So all this information that is being listed in your deliverables list and then you're tracking is part of the evidence that supports your building safety case. And what are we able to do with it is we are able to create data views, right, with our extended attributes. And probably this is one of the extended features or functionalities of the system where you can use attributes to switch data based on the metadata that's associated with the files. And probably this is one of the things that your existing CDs may not have. So we're able to go into documents per strategy, estate-wide. If you have a building with multiple blocks, you're able to filter it by that. And one of the important things for high-risk buildings is, especially when you come to an apartment level information, what is it that you actually need per individual apartment? So we have seen customers actually capture up to 30 attributes per apartment, including your active and passive fire safety systems. You're looking at your overarching system that supports a floor. You're looking at photographic evidence for materials used. So this can be defined. This is the type of granular information that you can define as a customer and what's needed. We know that we can give you this list, but you can actually decide what is actually needed and how the information flows from your other systems and how the building safety case auditor or the VSR can actually make use of that information. So that's what we can do at a granular level, at an apartment level basis. Now, that's all the key information. I can then look at the O&Ms, that is pretty much looking at how the systems actually operate and interact. We also have a dedicated section for fire and life safety that looks at every single piece of information that is related to a fire aspect. We have got that going. Now, what is all this? It's all evidence that's created in different views. But what's interesting as we go forward is identifying the gaps. And this will help you de-risk your building for all the eventualities that Krish actually mentioned a short bit ago. So you know what your expected deliverables are. And what you're seeing here in red is basically all the gaps. And anything that you see here that has got some records and there is some progress on it, you see that it's happening. So the dashboard really helps you identify those gaps and try to make sure that you understand what your risks are and try to mitigate them. And at an overarching level, if you're looking at it, you're expecting 1,863 files. 43% of them is already in a workflow that has started. Only 20% have actually made through the validation. So this is making sure that you have all the right evidence in place and in hand to make sure that you can make informed decisions for your building going forward. And a transition from a contractor's way of finishing the building and then the way that principal accountable person runs the building going forward, it's really essential to have this sort of visibility so that you can manage your building more efficiently and be risk averse. So with that, I'll just hand this back. So thank you very much.
Jez, just quickly before we hand over to Paul, we've had a question come in during the demo that I think was in part answered, but I wanted to know whether you had any more sort of additional to add to that. The question being, can you rename the document numbering so as per either our company standard or the BIM standard, for example?
Yes, we can. So this is the initial part of setting up, where we will sit down with you and define the deliverables and your document numbering mechanism, and then we can incorporate that into our system. Absolutely possible. Yeah, that's Kate. That's Kat Schmidt. Right. Hope that answered the questions there, Kat.
Perfect. Thanks, Jasmine. Paul, I'll hand. Oh, hang on. We've actually got another quick question that's just come in. So before I hand over to you, Paul, we'll just cover this off now as we go, as it's sort of related again to the demo. It says, who would be uploading the evidence to those different areas, e.g., O&M or fire safety?
So we have two. This is where I mentioned we have two approach to this. So one is a self-managed delivery, where we will set the system up and we will give users access to upload the information. So it would be subcontractors and contractors uploading information into it. That's option one. We know that's a painful task. That's why we have our sister company, that's CreateMaster, that takes the pain away from you. So we sit down with you, we define what the structure is, and then as a CreateMaster's managed service, we will pull information from different parts of your CDEs, and we will upload that information for you, and then make sure that it's ready for you to get going. I hope that gives you that flavor. And I think Paul is going to talk a bit more on that as we continue.
That's perfect. Thanks, Jaslyn. Paulius, I'll hand back over to you now.
So I think that leads nicely into what we want to talk to you about next, right? It's pulling all of that key building information into one place, right? So starting with defining the requirements up front, early engagement, and setting out a clear mechanism for what is going to be delivered on a record by record basis, granular detail that Jess spoke about, the timelines of when it's going to be done, and being able to track that delivery throughout the construction phase in terms of compliance, what's being received and is going through the workflow, and what is still outstanding. And that visibility can be given to anyone that you deem anyone that you decide to give access to in simple terms, right? So that helps ensure that the right information, the required information, is handed over to the asset operator, the end client essentially, and that it's aligned with the legislation and the ambition of keeping a golden thread of information and being able to maintain that golden thread post Gateway 3 when the building goes into the operation phase, right? So there's an element of having this data set live and managed by the responsible parties once the building is actually complete. So essentially one platform, one solution to bring information from all the fragmented systems that might be in play, your CDE, the quality assurance records, an O&M platform, a SharePoint, a folder drive somewhere, and evidencing that information as you go through the construction phase to help you manage the risk, to demonstrate compliance, and to share it with the regulator when required. And then we will echo that message quite a few times, but it's all about a solution that meets these requirements at the moment. We've seen a lot of talk about Golden Thread. We've seen a lot of talk about gateways. We've seen a lot on the Building Safety Act, but it's not always specific. There's not always a solution that is defined at the moment. It's a hot topic out there that everyone is trying to talk about. So a key goal of ours, an activity of ours, is to sit down with yourselves, provide a starting point, and then use that to enable you to achieve compliance and provide real solutions that can be delivered in time for the October date, or for buildings that hand over later, enable you to hand those buildings over and support the building safety case as well. So that means a standard defined template that aligns with the legislation and what the regulators are asking for as an ambition, right? It's not prescriptive in the legislation. It doesn't tell you exactly what you need. So we then use our experience, use our access to key industry players to help define that and actually make sense of it and give it to you as a starting point. It's an extension of our standard service that most of you are already familiar with. So if you have CreateMaster on your project, we're doing the digital handover piece for you. This dashboard, this gateway compliance piece would become an extension to that service. So that would be quite easy to deploy within your existing processes and existing workflows, just as an extension to something you're already quite familiar with. It will give you real visibility, real-time visibility, again, of what you have and haven't got at any given stage, so you can track progress and evidence that progress and manage the risk. Again, repeating myself here multiple times, but I think risk management is a key topic that comes up with building operators and asset owners when we speak to them. And the expectation there is that most of that risk will be filtered down in the contract documents for the contractors to manage in terms of the records that need to be given to the end client. Tagging the data properly, again, enables you to make sense of that data, to navigate the records, and to give that same to the end client and the regulator, and enable permissions for different responsible parties, authorities, or stakeholders to access specific data sets as and when required, and you can turn that on and off as you see fit. So it's taking a one-point solution approach to managing digital information on high-rise resi buildings and achieving compliance. And the tools that we use to achieve that is Zootech as a platform to enable you to do so, and the Golden Thread dashboard that you saw. CreateMaster supporting that digital handover piece and giving you a fully managed service to take the pain away from having to chase that and manage that yourselves. And then a solution that you can hand over to the client for them to take ownership of and keep that data live post-completion in the cloud, enabling them to pass it on to the relevant authorities and regulators as and when required. Back to you, Harry.
Perfect. Thanks, Paulius. We're shortly going to come on to. We've got one final poll that we hope you can help us with. Poll 3 that we'll come on to a moment, and then after that, we're just going to kind of follow up. There's been a few more questions come in, so we'll just ask some questions of our panel. But before we do, I just wanted to kind of, I guess, just briefly kind of surmise and reaffirm the key takeaways from today's session. So those being the 2 points on the screen here. So disparate systems, formats, and significant volumes of information can create risk. And also having key building information easily accessible for BSA compliance and for preparing and evidencing your building safety case for Gateway 3 is fundamental. Right, if we move on to the final poll, I think on the previous poll there was a slight issue with selecting multiple options, so that should have been fixed now. Poll 3 should appear on your screens shortly. What do you need to get ready to register higher risk buildings / building safety case? That's now live. Pretty even split at the moment. Digital platform is slightly in the lead, but it's a relatively even split between digital platform templates and then a managed service for handover. The lowest percentage at the moment being business safety case consultancy. Fabulous. Thank you for everybody that's responded to that, and thank you to everybody that's responded to all of the polls during the session. Before we wrap up today, I just wanted to kind of fire over some questions that have come in through the session from those of you that are on the call. So we've had a few that have just come in the last couple of moments, actually. So one here is saying, is there a charge to the building owner? Is there a charge to the building owner to maintain the information? Jeslyn, that might be one for you to pick up, I think. Jeslyn, I think you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think, is it a charge to the building owner to maintain the information? I think we have, and then I think there's another question that says, is it a plan to have this as a hosted solution or Handover as an offline one? So I think let's put them together, right? And how we actually normally proceed. So what happens is at Gateway 3, if we are typically contracted with a contractor, right? The contractor's responsibility gets finished there. And then what we do is we talk to the principal accountable person or the asset owner, and then make sure that we have two options there. One, a hosted solution, wherein the customer pays a monthly licensing fee, and then that goes on in perpetuity for as long as he wants to keep the information hosted. So that's model one. Model two is if you want an offline snapshot of the data, that's also possible. We can give an offline snapshot that can be handed over in normal mechanisms. But our preferred mechanism would be a hosted solution, because you would want to keep that information live, because over the course of your building's life cycle, you may want to update or upgrade or do some work. So that's something that we always recommend to our customers. I hope that answers those two questions there. And
Yeah.
I think third one is also for me, I think.
Yeah, just I was going to say, I think as our head of solutions, the next one definitely kind of sits in your space as well. So David has asked, you've discussed about standard templates being developed for Gateway 3 application. Have you developed such a template for Gateway 2 pre-commencement application 2?
Yeah, I think we have an expected list, and that's informed by some of the projects that we have done and based on 19650. So we know on a pre-commencement side, or so right from the design stage on, what are the relevant information that you need, right? So we have a list of that as well, and a part of our pack. So we can, if there is a need for us to set up a session to go through that, we can do that, of course, offline. Yeah.
Perfect. Justin, last one for you. I think these are sort of coming through sort of as we speak off the back of the demo that you've just given. So we've had some that came in towards the start of the session, Krish, that I'm going to sort of pan to you for in a moment. But if we just cover off this last one with you, Justin, if that's okay. It says, is the information available offline when the project is finished through USB? Can you add additional information later? And is that an easy process?
It will be a read-only static version at the point of handover, because of contractors due deliverables. We lock it. I mean, there are mechanisms to add data to it, but I wouldn't say it's going to be that easy on an offline snapshot, right? So you probably need a hosted solution to make those changes. So, Kat, sorry, that's the honest answer on that, Kat, for the time being. We can work with you to understand these requirements a bit more in detail and see what your requirements are, and then work out some solutions for that. Possible.
Perfect. One more for you, Jess, here from Irina. So this is who is validating the information, its accuracy, completeness, etc. If contractor goes for option 2, enhanced service, will it be down to the create master or the contractor?
So typically, I'll tell you the workflow mechanism here, right? So we set up the expectations on the deliverables list, and then we upload the information into the system, and then we pass it through one review cycle with yourselves as a client. We do our quality checks internally, and then once we finish our quality checks, we get a client review so that we are sure that you're happy with the quality of work that we have done. So we'll have contractor submitting information, create master doing a quality check, and then eventually as a customer or end client, you'll also have the ability to say, yep, we're happy with that information. So we have a stage process to actually cover that. Okay. So validity of the information is really important for us.
Perfect. Thank you, Justin.
Yeah.
And thanks everyone for their questions. There's a last one here from Mark around sort of the ease of sort of flipping the Gateway 3 dashboard onto an existing Create Master project. Absolutely, that's one we can kind of pick up offline, Mark. So either myself or Paulius or one of Paulius's team will kind of be in touch to have that discussion with you offline. Before we wrap up, we do have some other questions that came up earlier in the session that were for, I think, probably more specific to Krish and his presentation. One of them, the first one being, do you have examples of what good looks like with a building safety case and sufficient evidence required to demonstrate the as-built designs? Krish, is that one that you can take for us?
Sure, happy to. So there's a section on the HSE website that specifies that they will not be providing templates for the safety case or the report itself, but the high risk, the high hazards industry we work in for oil and gas specify a number of hazards that need to be considered. So they're up to 20, whereas for construction it's just fire and structure. So we have strong experience on what a safety case should look like, how the document should be put together, the report itself. But if you go onto the HSE website, there is still information on what should form part of your safety case, what shouldn't be part of your safety case. But based on my presentation, you saw the first 4 stages. That's essentially the core requirement that you need to be able to put a safety case together. So hopefully that answers the question, but there is no specific template and there will not be a specific template. It's really up to the consultants you're using or the client themselves to really think about how to put a safety case together and what that should look like with the sufficient evidence needed. Hopefully
Perfect.
that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that, Krish. There's another couple that I think you'll be able to help us answer, Krish. Whilst we've got a few more minutes, it'd be good to sort of cover off all the questions that have come in.
Sure.
So the first one being, do you know how the BSR is going to regulate and enforce this, given the thousands of high-rise buildings in the UK, which includes those already in use and those being built?
Sure. So the registration process that we have until 30th September, we really give the regulators a snapshot of your building and the inherent risks within that building. So we're based on fire, structure, and your resident demographic. So and then based on that information, they will prioritize the list of buildings that they want to call forward first. So they've specified that within the space of 5 years, from the 30th of September, they will be able to assess all buildings. So for instance, if you had vulnerable residents in your building and there is some risks of fire, of spread of fire and structural collapse, for instance, then you can assume that you're going to be called earlier rather than later in that 5-year period. But yeah, they will, based on the registration process, they will assess the high risk buildings and then pull them forward earlier rather than later.
Thanks, Chris. And last one for you being, what's the difference between key building information and a building safety case? Could you give us a bit more detail on that, please?
Yeah, so the key building information is really, like I said, a snapshot of your building. So and with some basic information that you should be able to populate with your fire risk assessment or an external wall system appraisal if you have that. And it just gives, there's guidance on the government website on the Building Safety Act link on the .gov website that specifies the key building information you need, but the safety case itself is very different from just that basic information. That is just essentially for us, that's just stage one of the gateway process that we've shown. The safety case itself is a much more formidable document which takes that building information firstly to allow you to do your hazard identification, your risk assessment, then to look at your maintenance program and validation of that program, and then your mandatory occurrence reporting and your resident engagement survey. So there's a big difference, but the starting point really is that key building information. Without that, you can't really perform any of the subsequent stages. I hope that helps.
Very helpful. Thanks, Krish. Jasmine, we've had another couple coming for you. If you don't mind taking those quickly. So one's just saying, how long does it take to get handover and building safety case information into our Gateway 3 solution for each project? Summarising, if we were to move forward now, could this be ready, for example, by the end of September?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we typically say 6-week time frame, right? So to get onboarded and getting that project up and running. The most important part in this is making sure that we firm up on the deliverables, that we will need some collaboration with our customers. And once we have that, we will be able to get that items firmed up and make sure that we get the dashboards turned on, train up your people, and make sure that we get up and running. So that's a short and sweet answer for that, Harry.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Jez. And one last one, and then we're going to wrap up. Just says, why can't I adapt my own CDE for this process? I think, Paulius, you kind of touched on that within your presentation, but Jez, I don't know if you want to give a bit more of an answer to that one.
Yeah, definitely. Why not? There's two aspects to this, right? One being the ownership of data, right? So I'd actually emphasize that a bit on this part, because contractors do deliverables, or their remit of work finishes at Gateway 3. They hand over and then that they're done. But when it comes to the client or the principal accountable owner who's managing that asset going forward, it's evident that he has to manage that seamlessly going forward. So having that transition in a very streamlined manner from the existing fragmented CDEs to a client CD is really important. And that's what our solution is. So it's about consolidating all that information where you get that visibility. So, and then you have ownership of that. So that's the first piece of it. The second piece of it is the current CDEs may not have all the metadata and then all the attributes that you need to track those deliveries, right? So what we are doing here is we are trying to compartmentalize information. We are trying to curate the information that is needed for developing that building safety case in line with fire and life safety requirements, in line with the structural safety requirements, and in line with the building information. So we are trying to compartmentalize that information. This may not be possible in your current ecosystem, or it will be a lot of work to try and reconfigure your existing CDs to meet up this process. So in my view, there's two scenarios: ownership and then configurability to align with what's needed for the safety case. That's the short answer for that, Harry. Hope that, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's brilliant. Thank you, Justin. Look, I think that probably brings us to a close. It's time to wrap up. I just wanted to thank everybody that's joined us for the session today. I hope this has been useful. And thanks again to all of our speakers. We will follow up with the on-demand version in the next couple of days. And if you have any kind of further questions post-event, please do get in touch with us directly via email. We'll always be happy to kind of answer those at any time. So look, thank you all. Have a great day, and we hope to see you all soon. Bye-bye.